Welcome to the Snow Family Racing Garage, where we start off by learning how not to replace door hinges, closely followed by how to do it right. Let me explain. I replaced the door hinges on that door with the door still on the car. Yes, it was a challenge. Yes, it can physically be done. But what can't be done is getting that door aligned back up to actually close and do the things that it's supposed to do. You know, we like doors that actually work, right? So what happened was I replaced the door because the pins were so worn. They were worn into the base metal, past the bushing. Hinges are no good. Chuck them in the garbage. So now, to get that door aligned, I have to take the fender off. And I have to take the hood off because the hood's attached to the fender. I've seen references to being able to, stuff a block of wood or something and hold the hood up. I'm not about to take that chance. I'm just going to take the hood clear off. I've made some marks and it'll just come right off. It'll go right back on. I'm working on making marks all around with a Sharpie, which is right here in my back pocket. So that way I can get everything put back the way it's supposed to. I'm also going to keep careful track of the shims so that way they can go back in. Now, let me take you over to a spare part and I'll show you what we're looking at. Now, Eric, what the heck are we looking at? That's the backside of a fender off of the same style Monte Carlo. This is the LS nose. It's not the swoopy SS, which came out a year after this one was made. But since I have an extra fender, I can look at it. Let's go in a little bit, and we can see all the locations where there are bolts that need to come loose. And I'm able to come down here. I can see everything I need to see, so that way I can take that fender off and do it right and effectively, as opposed to, hey, why isn't this coming loose, and grabbing and shaking and wondering why it's not coming loose. So I'm going to start getting sockets arranged so that way I can do this. I'm going to get the hood loose, probably going to set that somewhere. I don't know. It'll get set somewhere. Let's start figuring things out. Before we get to taking the fender off, I'm going to take you on the journey of how I started to change these door hinges the wrong way. Then we'll take the fender off. So here's the door jamb of the Monte Carlo. As you can see, you've got one hinge there. That's the lower hinge and the upper hinge. The upper hinge has all of the hardware for the detents and stuff that help hold it, part way open, whether it's, half open or all the way open. You can see the mechanism and the spring work like they're supposed to. The bottom hinge is much simpler. It's just a hinge. So I'm going to start with the lower hinge first because, well, let's face it, it's a little bit easier than that one, and I can think about how to get to the nuts and bolts behind the hinge pin while I take this guy out, which is much simpler. So 3 bolts there, 3 bolts on that side. I suspect this is metric because it's an 81. I'll let you know. As you can see in this slightly precarious situation, I've got myself in. The door hinge, all the bolts are loose. They're right there. I have the door supported on a jack and the bubble wrap, which conveniently came with the door hinges. I'm going to go grab an extra set of hands. We're going to wiggle the door a little bit to get that hinge out and replace it with the new one, which is right here. Beautiful black, straight from Goodmark. We're just going to slide it in. The video doesn't do this justice. I just ruined every chance I had of doing one hinge at a time. That bushing is all sorts of out of whack. It's worn into the base metal of the hinge. That little fluffy part there, that's actually the bushing. So it's all ovaled out. So now I absolutely have to do the top hinge right now, this exact second. So here we go. So the door has can of wormed on me. I opened the can of worms and now I'm committed. As the camera focuses, you can see how far out of whack that hinge pin is. And if you hold it out and look at it, you can see how much of an angle that's kicked off at, especially if I try and get you in a blank space there where you can see everything. So, kind of got to fall back and regroup. I got to get the upper hinge on. I may have to take the door away from the car a little bit by undoing the bolts on the door side and moving it out to get the bolts on the door in. We're going to see what happens. So now that you've seen how I pretty much screwed up doing the door hinges and have any hope of getting that aligned, now we'll get to the point where I should have started at the beginning and just taken the fender off. So let's continue with the story. I'm working on getting the hood off. Just so that you know, that's a 1/2 inch on this car, and then on the side, you have this little 9/32 little tiny screw that also goes into the hood hinge and all that other stuff in there. So don't forget that little guy when you're taking your hood off. The hood's off. Took a couple of people because, you need one on each side. We don't want to drop a hood through a windshield. Anyways, I'm going to start working on getting the fender off. And just like we saw, there's 2 here, those there. I'm going to start with the underside in the wheel well, getting those guys free. There's a whole bunch of them. There's 2 rows because there's bolt to the outer and inner side of the fender. I'm going to make a couple of marks. I'm going to take my Sharpie and draw a mark there so that way I know where it is. Same thing up here by the hood hinge. I'm going to draw a mark there. And apparently this has been done before because we shine a light in here. I'm shining directly on the bolt. There we go. Someone's already sprayed a little bit of white paint for a witness mark, so that way you can put the fender back on in the same spot. There is a bolt at the top. There's a bolt at the bottom. There's a little forky thing that goes in, and there's an alignment down there. Beware of all your shims. If you find shims under here, I know I've got some shims up here that I have to keep track of. Just make sure you keep track of those things and you'll be fine. Oh, there's also a bunch of little 10 millimeter screws all along the header panel to the inside of the fender. I am going to have to loosen up the header panel and come forward to be able to clear these studs. I'll have to figure that out in just a minute. I tell you what, guys, if you don't have an electric ratchet and an impact, you need one. I picked this guy up quite a few years ago as a Father's Day present. I'm now running a lot of the Skil stuff. When this one goes bad, I'm going to replace it with a Skil because I got the batteries and the rest of the stuff. I tell you, this just saved me a ton of cranking on a ratchet because that was a lot of threads and a lot of bolts. Get yourself one of these. It'll save your wrists, trust me. Quick tip time. As you're undoing the bolts, you're going to come across one that's right here. The headlight bucket kind of makes it really hard to get to, but if you're dealing with a plastic bumper car, look at that. It spreads apart exactly enough to get my gear wrench, ratchet wrench on there to loosen the bolt. That's a save. One more tip. This is starting to flex a little bit to make it easier to get to that bolt. So if time has been nice to your car, you'll have 2 bolts, 1 and 2 that hold the header panel on. If time hasn't been nice to your car, you'll have maybe 1 holding the front header panel on. So I'm going to loosen that guy. It's going to allow the header panel to flex out just a little bit to get that bolt clear. Ta-da! Got the fender off, so now we have access to the door hinges where we can adjust them at where they meet the body and meet the door. Keep in mind, the ones that are on the body side, they kind of, they keep everything oriented along the chassis, so that way you can correct any door gap misalignment at the very back, as well as any vertical placement that goes into it. Now, after we're done, I may have to go back and readjust the window. Previous video, link in the description for that one. That's easy to do. So, in the short term, I'll show you exactly what everything looks like and why it had to be this way. So as you can see, upper hinge, lower hinge. The upper hinge on the G-body has the springy thingy. This one, 3 bolts, that'll adjust everything, up, down, fore and aft, whereas those 3 in there, move the light just a little bit, that will orient everything this way and vertically. So that way you're able to get, your panel alignment here. And this may be something I have to put the fender on and off a couple of times just to make sure I get the door, the body line adjusted correctly, which is fine. I expect that. So short term, let me get up here. I have a little bit more gap back here than I'd like. I guess it really doesn't look so bad, does it? All right, well, cool. I'm going to adjust on it for just a minute. I may grab a wood block and a hammer and just lightly tap the hinges just to tighten up that gap at the back just a little bit to make me a little happier. But the good news is on that first close, those hinges felt nice. So let me show you what I'm doing to adjust this. I've got the jack at the back of the door. I had it closed. I got the door hinges snugged down to the point where it's like, okay, the door is close. And popped it open, found it just going a little bit lower than I want. So I've got the jack under the back with bubble wrap because, you know, I'm a sensible person. And I'm going to loosen these up just a little bit, crank the jack up, and tighten the hinges to the body back down. I'm happy with where it's sitting front to back. So now the big deal is up and down. And I may have to do some trickery with some shims back here to flex the door that way just a little bit, but we'll figure it out. I've got it all fitting nice at the back. Now I'm going to turn my attention to the front. I just had the fender on, and what I found was that the top of the door was too far in. So what I can do is loosen up those 3 bolts. I've got a pry bar right here that I'm going to be gentle with. I'm basically going to just set it in there on the door itself, loosen the bolts, and move it out about, 1/8 of an inch or so, and then test the fender on again. And I recognize that the fender has all sorts of angularity that you can adjust this way, but right now I'm purely looking at one direction. Things are starting to look good. With the door alignment as good as I can make it. Keep in mind, I'm not a professional body guy. I only play one on YouTube. I went back through with this guy, my big 1/2-inch breaker bar, and gave those bolts a final tightening down. What did I torque them to? The calibrated elbow says somewhere in the neighborhood of 70-ish foot-pounds, which for a 3/8 bolt is kind of a lot. But those that have a G-body know there are few things on the earth heavier than a G-body door. The 2-door B-bodies are about the only door I know that's heavier. Either way, we're going to start throwing the fender back on. Things are looking up. Everything is the way it should be, hopefully. So as you can see, the fender's back on, the door's hung right, the hood's on, but we have a problem. I screwed up. I pinched the hood latch cable that runs from just under the dashboard up to the front. Apparently I screwed up where the inner fender panel comes up. There's 2 rows of screws, and I said I need to make sure I keep that hood cable clear, and I didn't. So now I got to loosen up the inner fender panel and hope that I haven't hurt that hood latch cable. Let's get it done. Let me show you what I did. You see it? Yep, I pinched the hood latch cable just under the speed nut. So I put a nice little wowie in it. I'm going to articulate it a few times. It now wears a little bit of a flat spot, but we're free. And I'm going to go through and tighten those guys back down. Success. Everything's lined up right. The only thing I have left to do is go back and adjust the window. You guys have seen me do that on a previous video, which will be just right here. Go check that out.